Hello friends, welcome back to the channel. I hope you are all doing good. So today we will be discussing about the DSM regulations. DSM regulation, there were already certain presentations on this channel regarding the DSM regulations, and basically these regulations were regularly updated by the grid on the basis of the different scenarios. And this year also they have made certain changes, and the draft regulations were notified on 30th April 2024, for which the comments were invited till 25th May 2024, and later on these final notifications published on 5th August, and finally the date of effectiveness is 16th September. So basically DSM regulations is, as we all know, is about the difference in the scheduled generation and the actual generation, or the scheduled buying by the beneficiaries and the difference in the actual buying of the beneficiaries. So if there is a difference, so how this difference will be treated. So certain time a beneficiary or a grid or a generator may be penalized, and certain time he may be incentivized in order to support the grid. So all this comes in the DSM pool account, which is managed by the NLDC. So let's begin with. So before going through the regulations and what the rates have been mentioned, let me clarify certain things. I would be starting with this presentation in the way that I would be clearing certain definitions which may be required to understand these regulations. Also, I would be dealing these regulations with respect to a generator point of view. I would not be covering the renewables and the uh, beneficiaries or the buyers, basically buyers view. So, but once you understand the definitions, it would be easy for you to go through the regulations, and you can understand the regulations from the buyer's point of view also, as well as from the renewables point of view. So in this definition, the first term which has been come is the reference charge rate. The reference charge rate basically has been clear in my earlier PPTs on DSM. That is the fuel rate or the contract rate. If the plant is if the plant tariff is governed by the section 62, in that case the energy charge rate becomes the reference rate, and if the plant tariff comes under the section 63 of the CRC guidelines, then it is dealt with the contract rate. Also, the two more terms have been covered here. One is a renewable risk state, that is uh, area having more than 1000 megawatt of solar or wind but less than 5000, and the renewable super rich state, that is area having more than 5000 megawatt of solar or wind. So these three terms I think have been clear to you. One is the reference charge rate, and another is the renewable rich state, and the third one is the renewable super rich state. Then comes the normal rate of deviation. The normal rate of deviation is basically play a major role for the beneficiaries, because it's basically a sum total of three activities or three things. First is uh, first, to calculate this we need a one third of the area control price of the day ahead market for that particular block. For example, in a day ahead particular, let's talk about the block number 5 on any particular day. So what would be its normal rate? So the day ahead market for the block 5, the price is suppose 9 rupees. So we will take 3, and the RTM price for the same block on current day, that is because since RTM is itself is a real time market, is 6 rupees. So we will take one third of the current day, that is 2 rupees. So 3 plus 2 5, and what is the charge of the ancillary service for that time block? So let's say ancillary service charge is 12 rupees. So total would be, so we will take one third of the 12 rupees, that is 4 rupees. So total will be 3 plus 2 plus 4, that is 9 rupees. So it's basically a one third of the day ahead market price, one third of the real time market price, and the one third of the ancillary service charge. In case the ancillary service charge is not available, then we take the 50% proportion of the day ahead market as well as the RTM market. So the normal rate actually plays a major role for the buyers. In case of sellers, they were made free of the normal rate of deviation, and they were basically be incentivized or basically penalized on the basis of reference rate only. That is on the basis of their uh, the fuel cost or the contract rate which they have been entered. So let's begin with the regulations. Uh, the regulations, one of the most important change which has been done in this regulation is the change in the frequency band. In the previous regulations which were effective, the frequency band is between 49.94 to 50.03. What do I mean by that is that if any buyer, or sorry, if any seller is deviating its schedule either in the positive direction or in the negative direction by less than 10%, means the difference in the schedule generation and the actual generation difference is less than 10% of the schedule generation. In that case, he neither has to pay any penalty nor he will get any incentive. Means if he's under injecting at lower frequency at 49.96, he don't have to pay any penalty, or neither he, if he's supporting the grid at 49.96 frequency, he will not get any incentive. So it was like no gain, no loss. Just the frequency band is given so that any deviations which can be occurring because of the any schedule change can be taken cover of. But in these regulations, the regulations were made more stricter or narrower. So the frequency band has been revised to 49.97 to 50.03. So the lower end has been further narrowed down to 49.97 rather than 49.94 in the earlier case. So if you are under injecting below 49.97, you have to pay certain penalty. And similarly, if you are over injecting at that point of time, you may gain certain incentive also. So I'm not discussing here about the incentive rate, that I would be covering later on the presentation or in the case studies which you have taken up. Actually, to understand this whole different penalty and the incentive mechanism, we have divided this DSM into different cases. The case one, which I will be discussing just now, is the when the seller deviating from the schedule at doing under injection when the frequency is less than 50 hertz. So in that case, if the seller is deviating from the schedule and the frequency is less than 50 hertz till 49.97, if the deviation is within plus minus 10%, he don't have to pay any charges. But as the frequency further reduces and if he continues to under inject, then for each zero point zero 0.01 hertz change, he has to pay a 7% penalty of his reference charge rate, that is of his ECR or the contract rate as applicable to him. And this goes on till the frequency 49.90, means at 90 he has to pay a 150%. So let me explain you again. For example, at 49.96, if a buyer's fuel cost is 5 rupees, in that case at 49.96 he has to pay a deviation cost of 5 rupees 35 paisa. At 49.95, that deviation cost rises to 5.71, but so your loss would be 0.71 paisa. At 49.94, it would goes further 7 point, it increases further 7%, that is your loss increases to 1 rupees, and it goes on till 49.90 where it becomes the maximum, that is 2 rupees 50 paisa. So at 49.90 or beyond, if a seller is under injecting, then he has to pay a 50% penalty. So the penalties have been made more stricter. These were earlier not the case. So next move to the second case when you are doing the over injection at less than 50 hertz. So let me cover the lower frequency part first, and then I will cover up the higher frequency part. So if you are supporting the grid at lower frequency, at frequency less than 50 hertz, then what are the incentive you will get? So again, the as we have already discussed, till 49.97 there is no neither penalty nor incentive if the deviation is within 10%. But if we are supporting the grid and the frequency is less than 49.97, then for each 0.01 hertz down and you are supporting the generation grid, then by increasing the generation, then you have will get an incentive of 2%, 2.15%. And this continuously start increasing with each drop in frequency, and at 49.90 it becomes 115%. So at 49.90 or lower frequency, if you are supporting the grid, then you will get a 15% reference rate as your incentive for supporting the grid. So one thing which has been clear by the two cases which I have uh, discussed with you, that the penalty is 50%, but the incentive has been capped at 15% only. So in the penalty is capped at 50% and the incentive at 15%. So at any under injection would be a very uh, negative affair for the, it would basically a very highly uh, penalized job for the sellers, but the incentive which they get for supporting the grid is actually much lower. So let's study the third case, that is over injection at frequency above 50 hertz. So in case the frequency rises above 50 hertz and seller continues to over inject because of any particular reason, that he is not getting the sufficient schedule, or the schedule of the uh, generator is too low that he cannot run below it, or any startup is going on, whatever the case may be, or he cannot bring the lower down and he is forced to over inject. So in that case, uh, seller has to pay certain penalty. So the penalty works in the factor that if a seller over inject, then he would not get the fuel cost. He will be getting 50%, 40% depending upon the penalty. So till 50.03, any over injection above well, till 50.03, any over injection within the range of 10% of the scheduled generation, he will not pay any penalty, nor he will get any incentive. But if the frequency rises to 50.04, then he has to pay, he will not receive a 25% his fuel cost. That is, he has to pay a 25% penalty of his fuel cost for our injection. Secondly, if the frequency rises to 50.05, the rate further rises to 50%, means that 50% of the fuel cost he has to pay penalty. And if the frequency further goes beyond 50.05, in that case he has to pay 100% penalty. So the penalty is actually very steep here. Further, from 50.05, from 50.06 till 50.09, the penalty remains the same. That is, he will not get any money for his over injection. He basically just over injecting the grid without any, without getting anything. So that's fully his loss. To understand this, let's say his fuel cost is 5 rupees, and if he's over injecting uh, beyond at 50.06 to 50.09 frequency, in between that, then he has to pay whole fuel cost as the penalty, or he will not get money for that fuel cost. That's basically a loss for him. Further, the grid has further tightened the guidelines in this case. In the case if the frequency goes further above 50.10, and if a seller continues to over inject, in that case the penalty, he has to pay an additional 10% fuel cost as a penalty. Means now, for any over injection above 50.10, he would not be getting his fuel cost that has already been uh, done till the frequency is 50.09. But above 50.10, he will not get the fuel cost, plus he has to pay a 10% penalty from his pocket. Means his total loss would be 5 rupees 50 paisa if his fuel cost is 5 rupees. So in that case, a 50 paisa penalty he has to extra pay. So his loss would be 5 rupees 50 paisa. So that's basically very stricter guidelines has been made by the grid for the sellers if they are over injecting beyond 50.0 hertz, sorry 50.10 hertz. So in the next case, we will study the charges for deviation by under injection at frequency above 50 hertz. So let's begin the second last case. That is, if a seller is under injecting at frequency above 50 hertz, that is supporting the grid by doing under injection. So in that case, what's the incentive he will get? So till 50.03, there would be no gain or loss, but above 50.03 and for any under injection, he will gain a 7.5% of his fuel cost, and it reaches maximum 15% at 50.05. That is for any 0.01 change. The his incentive would be 7.5%, and at 50.05 it reaches maximum at 15%. So if seller is under injecting uh, beyond 50 at frequency higher than 50.05, his incentive is limited to 15% only. So the incentive has been there, but the penalty has been is much harsher. So the penalty is of close to 110% at frequency above 150.10, but the penalty is limited to, but the incentive is limited to 15%. So let's explain this case through table. So if a seller's fuel cost is 5 rupees, and if he's under injecting exposed by X amount, then for per unit he will get 3 rupees 0.375 paisa as the incentive, and it increases to 75 paisa at 50.05 and remains constant after that. So that's the case for the deviation by under injection at frequency above the 50 hertz. So in the next case, we will discuss about what if the seller is moving beyond its normal range of 10%. If it's deviating the schedule greater than 10% or less than 10%, what would be the penalty for or the incentive for him? So let's study the last case, that is the charges for deviation when salary is deviating beyond 10% of the schedule. So in that case, in this scenario, we have made two cases. One is the under injection and the other is the over injection. So any under injection of 10% from schedule or 100 megawatt, whichever is lower, seller has to pay certain penalty. The These penalty has been distributed in three categories. If the frequency is above 50 hertz, then the penalty would be the same as the fuel cost. So there would be neither gain or neither loss for the seller. But if the frequency goes below 50 hertz and the seller is under injecting beyond 10% or the 100 megawatt, then he has to pay a direct penalty of 50% of his fuel cost as the under injection loss. That is, even the frequency is 49.90, sorry 14.99, and if he's under injecting by 10%, then he has to pay 50%. That is, example which I have taken, in that the fuel cost is 5, so he has to pay a 2 rupees 50 paisa as the under injection loss. So he has to bear 2 rupees 50 paisa as the under injection loss for the deviation which is creating by doing under injection. So this is a flat till 49.90. Below 49.90, if he continues to under inject beyond 10% or 100 megawatt, then in that case the deviation or the penalty raises to 200% of his fuel cost. Means he has to pay a deviation cost of 10 rupees and he will save the 5 rupees as the fuel cost. So his under injection loss would be 5 rupees. Now comes the over injection. What would be the case when seller over inject beyond 10% or 100 megawatt? This is normally the case during startups or during the schedule, when the schedule is very much below the technical minimum and the generator cannot able to reduce the schedule. In that case, at any over injection about 10%, the grid has straightly told that it would be penalized and he will not get any money for our injection beyond 10% or 100 megawatt if the frequency is less than 50.10 hertz. So it means the case that if a seller wants to support the grid by over injecting beyond 10% at frequency lower than 49.90, in that case he has to pay. He will not get anything, so he neither he has to pay, but he will not get anything in supporting the grid. Instead for the amount of generation which he doing beyond 10% or 100 megawatt, in order to support the grid he will actually bear the loss on that. So that's the one thing which is been uncertain. It may be done because the grid doesn't want that you should deviate from the schedule. Your basic job is to run at the schedule. It's their job to maintain the frequency. Or and the second scenario is that if the frequency is above 50.10 and if a generator over inject, in that case he has to pay a 10% penalty for the amount which is under injecting. That is, he has to pay a penalty of 5 rupees 50 paisa, and his fuel cost is 5 rupees, so total loss would be his 5 rupees 50 paisa. So basically a 110% loss. So that's all about the DSM. So in short, the the I would summarize it by saying that the frequency band has been narrowed down 40 from 49.907 to 50.03, and the penalties have been made much stricter, and the incentives have been reduced to supporting the grid. So the generator has no option but to DSM is never a gain or loss scenario. It's basically a scenario where which generator has to fulfill the schedule and run the schedule as per the schedule. So he would not get anything in supporting the grid, but he would be penalized heavy if the schedule if he breaks the schedule or and under inject at lower frequency or over inject at high frequency. So that's all from my side. I hope you like the video. Please like the channel and subscribe to it. Thank you.